Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome, Data Vs. Hello. Thank you for joining us today. We are so excited. We have such an incredible event for you guys. We're going to get started here in just a moment. Real fast, I want to remind everyone that this event is going to be recorded. So if you have to hop off the call early, or if there's a colleague that wanted to join and couldn't make it, you will be able to share the recording link with them tomorrow. It will automatically be in your inbox. One other thing, we definitely want to make sure that you guys ask questions. So to ask a question, we're going to ask you to please use the Q&A button. If you look at your screen, there should be a banner with a bunch of different buttons, and you'll see that there's a Q&A button. That is the button that we would like you to please use to ask the questions. That way they're all in one nice, neat place for a moderator. And that way you guys can also upvote them. So if you have a question that you want to see answered, definitely make sure to upvote it. Okay, without further ado, we're going to jump in really quickly to who we are, what the Hive think tank does, what the Hive does, and then we're going to get into our amazing conversation today, a very special fireside chat. So for those of you who are new and don't know, my name is Maddie Watt. I am the Senior Manager of People and Programs at the Hive. And one of my main responsibilities is running the Hive think tank. So if you are returning, welcome back. And for those who are new, welcome. The Hive think tank is an ecosystem of entrepreneurs, corporations, and thought leaders. And we are bringing you events and blog content every other week, sometimes every week, and sometimes twice in a week. And the best way to keep up with us is to follow us on Meetup. So we do lots of different events and think tracks that include AI, blockchain, enterprise, industrials, and so on. And we're so excited today to be talking about supply chain and how it is changing in this ever crazy world that we live in. So I'm going to go really quickly into thanking our sponsors. Thank you guys so much. And if you want to reach out for sponsorship or find out how to work with the Hive think tank, please email me. I'll drop it in the chat. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Tim Robbie, the Hive's managing director, and then we're going to jump into today's program.
Thank you, Matty. It's a great pleasure today to be hosting this event. Very briefly, the Hive is a venture capital entity. And in particular, we are a subclass of venture capital that's called a venture studio. What we do is leverage data and data-related approaches. Think about it as deep tech approaches to help drive transformation, disruption, new opportunities in the enterprise and a few key industry segments. So supply chain is a big area, and fulfillment are an important area of focus for us. And overall, if there are any entrepreneurs out here, if you're interested in joining one of our companies or collaborating with us to start a company, we look forward to hearing from you. And so that's it about the Hive. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome Suketu Gandhi and Roland Ford. Suketu, we've known him for a few months, incredible strategic thinker, partner at Kearney, which used to be called A.T. Kearney. And I'll hand it over to you, Suketu, to drive the rest of the conversation.
Thank you, Ravi. And when Ravi said, hey, we got to talk to a ton of folks out of the Valley who are really thinking about what the future looks like, and they want to talk about supply chain, I said, you know what? If I'm going to do that, I'm going to need somebody who's done it for 34 years at one of the largest companies, or the largest companies in the world. And that's Roland Ford. Roland and I have collaborated for some time, and back and forth, we've had conversations from customers to cattle and everything in between. And those are always fun because you walk away and you hear Roland, and then you got to think about for the second consequence or the third layer of insight that he really told you about, there you go, now I fully get it. So whenever I talk to Roland, I write everything down and really think about what he really meant there. Roland, maybe if you want to introduce yourself, because I would not do justice.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And I guess first and foremost, appreciate the opportunity to be on the Hive and in partnership with Kearney, Saketu, and the team here. It's a privilege, and my career is a little bit probably on the unique side. I joined Walmart back in 1983, right after they completed their first $1 billion in revenue. And then over my next 33, 34 years, it really grew to over $500 billion. So just that hockey stick and scale was really, really interesting. And then on top of that, I played different roles at different times through the company. For the first 20 plus years of my career, I grew up in logistics and became the chief logistics officer for the company. Then in the middle part of my career, I tried to keep it a secret, but my undergraduate was computer science, and I flipped it over and became the CIO for many years. And then my last responsibility that I had before I retired was chief administrative officer of the company, which encompassed all of those things that I had previously managed, including shared service and back office, as well as global sourcing around the world. So my background and experience is really logistics, supply chain, and the administrative side of the business. And so had 34 years of that and just really relished it. It was a wonderful experience, was great experienced associates around the world. So that's a little bit about me, Saketu.
Great. Thank you, Roland. And one last mea culpa I have to do was I am a computer science undergrad and master's, and my first job out of my master's was working for Walmart in Bentonville, Arkansas. And if there was one thing I took away was it was retail is detail. And if you can't get the details, then don't bother to show up in retail, is what I was told. So let's get into the details. Tightly connected supply chains have broken. And, you know, that's a wonderful statement to get a lot of people worried, but it's just a fact. And then I think Yossi captured it very well, that it wasn't that they are broken. It just revealed the cracks that already were there. And the accelerated shifts that were underway exposed everything. And one of the things we always know that if systems, processes, people that are too tightly connected and don't have the flexibility to move, they break. The second thing is if you don't have information that flows end to end, so you have visibility on what is happening within your control and outside of your control, it's very difficult to anticipate. And then the third thing that comes into play is clarity on who pays the bills. And that's where we'll probably start the first part of this conversation, that it's the consumer or the customer. And this is focused for retail companies, consumer product companies, industrial manufacturers, anybody who either sells something, makes something, or helps somebody sell or make something. That's how we're gonna look at the conversation. So supply chains are broken. That's just a fact. If you could flip to the next page and you go, you know, what caused it? Roland, you must have been sitting there relishing on the one side saying, hey, I don't have to deal with this day to day. But as you think about it, what jumps to your mind when you say what broke the supply chain?
Well, there's a couple things working through this process. First of all, through any type of breaks, and you do have some things that are naturally occurring that break supply chains, some things that are unnatural in that process. But the biggest thing you try to protect, and that is the customer impact. You know, as I look at across what really occurred in this most recent event, certainly it starts with the pandemic and the pause that everybody had through that period of time. You think back all the way back through to raw materials, and there was just this big gap in production and activity. And then you had some compounding issues. You know, we're struggling right now at the ports. We're struggling on the drayage side. We're struggling with fuel costs. We're struggling with labor. and you get this compounding and composting kind of supply chain that really is riddled with opportunity across the landscape. But I think you have to realize that supply chains in general were not built for lengthy issues. We've always been able to absorb regional type impacts. Think of a hurricane or tornadic opportunities. We've been able to basically get through those particular issues. But this was worldwide and national, if you think just about the US. And so it was a lot different than those things that have posed to us in the past. I think the last national event prior to the pandemic that I really felt like had national impact was 9/11. And that where, you know, everything just physically stopped for a period of time, but certainly didn't last as long as the pandemic has lasted. And so I think if you start with the crux, okay, this happened, and then you start breaking apart what transpired after that. I'll tell you one thing that really makes me think about supply unchained. A quick story. I'll use generic retailers in the example to not expose anyone in particularly, but think about two large retailers, not necessarily just e-commerce or just physical brick and mortar, but two large retailers. And from time to time, I do experiments and I order products to see what the lag time is and what the pricing differential is. I mean, I still have that logistics running through my blood and have to really solve in my mind who is doing the best at those capabilities. Well, what happens is I ordered the product from company A and company B delivered the product. And the marketing on the package was company B. But company A saw that they could not make me satisfied with the delivery times and the products, and did a dummy account with product B and provided me those goods that I had ordered. Now, to me, that is supply unchained, where you just really look out across the landscape and said, who can do this in the most effective and efficient way? Of course, it is about dollars and cents as well, and trying to do it efficiently. But if you lose customers in this world, it's very hard to get them back. And so doing something unnatural at times really makes a difference in your customer impact. So what caused the disruption? I think Suketu, has started with the pandemic, but certainly has grown to broader elements. And there are unnatural events that are occurring across the landscape to ensure customers aren't disappointed.
You know, that's a great story, right? If I unpack the story, what does that tell us? And that you have to really think about the customer back. That's the first thing you talked about. The second thing is knowing about the susceptibility of your supply base. Knowing when you cannot do something that you promised you can. Powerful. The third thing is being aware that disruptions can and will happen. And I know everybody loves this narrative of the perfect storm, right? Because it was a great movie that came out. And then now everybody uses the analogy, and you really decompose it out. And you go, was it really a perfect storm? Or were there things within that perfect storm that you could have controlled? Things that you could have known? And the flip side of 88% of supply chains were impacted by disruptions. We talked to about 450 companies globally, from 5 billion to let's just say 500 billion. And the thing that came out was people who were prepared for it, had the information basis, got paid significantly. We have seen 3x top line and bottom line improvement on companies that reacted. And then the last thing is this concept of hidden factories, which is all the fixes that you had been putting in your supply chain because you couldn't redesign and make it right, came back to bite you. So these are the four things that really jumped, and bite they did, and they hit pretty hard. So then you go, okay, agreed. A lot of supply chains affected. The last thing that I gotta talk is, and you said something really important, was the time frame. This wasn't a one and done. I've had a lot of conversations with supply chain leaders who said, "Can I wait this one out? Do you think I can retire before this problem really becomes a big one?" And I can tell you, one of the worst words in economics these days is transient. Oh, the inflation is transient and the labor problems are transient. And one day the energy problem is transient. The second day transportation is transient. The last day, the channel shift is transient. Please abandon that. If you think this is transient, then you might end up with the 88%, and we don't think it'll be in a good place. So shifting from the negative side of the story to think about, hey, what can be done? If we flip to the next page, what that really brings together is the story of what are the 4 things you should think about. One is customer centricity. And you'll get tired of Roland and me using the word consumer and customer, but it truly is the age when supply chains need to fulfill the function of being there for the customer. If that is not the case, and I know I'm preaching to the choir for all the folks who came out of the Valley, but that is the number 1 part of the game.
You know,
The
so
second, yes, please.
If I can just interject
Yes.
on that thought, you know, I don't think that, going back to the original cause, the pandemic was, I think, an accelerant towards customer centricity versus an event that caused it. You know, I know personally at Walmart, before I retired, we were working on things like pickup at store. Not because we knew or had any foresight that a pandemic was coming, but we were trying to have a solution for customer wait times. Customers were getting agitated of shopping and having to wait in lines for any period of time. And so this was a relief valve. But what happens typically when you hit these inflection points, it accelerates behaviors in a way that if you're not working on customer-centered opportunities, then you tend to be lost when those things happen. But if you're really staying close to your consumer, and that goes for whoever your consumer may be, then when the inflection point happens, you can hopefully accelerate with the issue. And so in 2015, probably, we were working on pickup. And then we started to perfect it, started to roll it out, pandemic happened, and that accelerant then just exploded across the country to now where we could do pickup, whether it would be e-commerce and or in the physical store, we could do pickup at the store. So think of these things as still being connected to consumer centricity, if you will, but as an accelerant. Are you working on those things that are going to matter regardless of what the inflection point may be? Sorry, I just wanted to.
No, this is a great one. So I'm going to turn one back to you, Roland. Is, you know, let's say I am a manufacturer of goods that are either sold through a distributor and then eventually makes it to the end user. You might be a manufacturer in the chemical space and things like that. And it's hard to see why the end customer matters. And then there's always this challenge that said, you know what? The customers always change their mind. They seem to be moving in a direction that's slightly different. How do you get leadership, genuine business leadership, to agree on things that may not have a direct line of sight from supply chain to customer? You know, what's not the perfect answer, but what's the thinking that goes into that justifies the capital or the operational spend?
Yeah, I think, you know, the further away you are from the ultimate customer, perhaps the harder it gets. I spent my career probably the closest connected to the consumer because they were physically in our stores, shopping on e-commerce with our site, and we could tell what their interest and what their opportunities were that we had with them. So the further away you are back through manufacturing, perhaps it does become more difficult to see those. But I would say in any business, you have to be tenacious about something. And who you sell to, who you trade with, better be one of those top priorities. In our business, it was the top priority in order to stay connected to purpose-driven capabilities that allowed us to stay connected with that consumer. So I can't really answer for manufacturing in that sense, but I would just say you've got to be tenacious and connected as best you can to that through that consumer lens, or you will get left behind. It's just a matter of when, not if.
Wow, that's a stark warning coming from a voice of experience that you put out there. The second thing that we've kind of discussed quite a bit, and last week Roland and I had this show on the road with the MIT Media Lab on AI and what it means over there. But here we've separated data and AI with automation. And the reason we did that was because data and AI are great enablers. They allow you to make wonderful decisions. We think that the era of decision making by human beings has gone from 100 now to maybe 20%. But that doesn't mean human beings are not important. No conversation about singularity. But this is all around what decisions should human beings make. And the next one is automation. The reason we separated those two was there is a pat answer these days to the hidden factory problem that says something's not working, it's an exception, so let's automate it. Every time we automate something because it was not working, or because it was not appropriate for human beings to do without thinking about the end-to-end, you have created a weak link in your chain. Every time you do it, it's a weak link. And that's a really important part. And I know I can always get Roland fired up about automation. So maybe, I don't know, Roland, if you want to talk a little bit about automation before we go to the number 4 in this set of dimensions.
Well, I'll talk a little bit about both AI and automation, just real briefly. I think at the end of the day, AI is a wonderful tool. It's become a buzzword for sure. And it is insightful, it is learning, it is capability that you really have to have the talent to mine the capability behind AI, but it's a wonderful tool in the business. But I would tell you that I don't think it can replace or will replace in the short term the power of observation. The power of observation of what's going on with your consumer trends and your consumer data is just so powerful. I don't know who quoted this, so I won't say who necessarily, but I know it's not me. But the one guiding principle that I've kind of lived by is that if you want to see change how you do things. But if you want to make change how you see things. And so the power of observation with the capabilities enabled through AI becomes a really tool that can now be utilized to reach actionable issues inside your business. Now, for me, automation is something that is at an inflection point, particularly in the United States, but I would make the comment holistically across the world from my observations. Automation is, there's a part of the labor force that I think is delayed in getting back to work, but then there's a part of the workforce that I think will choose not to return to certain jobs and certain components of the economy. And I don't know, time will tell whether I'm right or wrong in that particular observation, but I think people have moved on and want to graduate to more meaningful work and more work that empowers both your brain and your body to do good things. And so automation becomes, again, one of those tool elements that really has the capability to help protect that entry-level labor force in a way that's productive and efficient. And I think it's happening in supply chains at an accelerated rate. And I think it's happening in back end of stores and even the retail environment itself, how you shop could be introducing automation at a more accelerated rate. We've seen at the public side bits and pieces, but I've been able to peek behind the curtain at some of these retailers, and I know they're working on things that will make product more accessible, better in stock, at a greater efficiency and a greater productivity than we've ever seen before. So it's an exciting time to be in this space. And I think AI, automation, all of those tools will be something that will be leaned on heavily in the next five to 10 years.
So, if I may kind of dig a little bit deeper into manufacturing and other industries, what we have found quite consistently over the last 18 months, although we've been on this journey for the last 36 months, has been that, for example, data and AI, real consumer customer demand sensing has started to take off. And this is at a detailed level of granularity, right? At each customer level. On the flip side, what is happening in the supply space is, and when you put both the demand and supply together, you get, what is my value? What is the available value or value at risk? And you can start to make true decisions on the supply chain. The next thing that comes up into is the, how do I merge data and AI with automation? And we've all seen dramatic increase in automation around DCs, on distribution centers. But one of the large trends that has taken hold because of automation is the dramatic rise of the mini DC. Whether it's the mini DC to fulfill certain kind of odd size products. We see this a lot in, for example, auto parts, because an axle requires a very different kind of storage, pick, pack, ship than a fan belt, for example. And how do you ensure that you have that? The next thing is around e-com delivery. And I know there's a lot of work going on in this space, but what hasn't truly happened is a plug and play model that allows you to go in and say, okay, it's an e-com order. Let me tell you what you can do with it and deliver for the most optimal or the most green cost that can be thought through. So giving the customer the choice in there. In the area of factories, it had been happening globally, as Roland talked about, but it is coming into the States and back again globally. The rise of the mini factory is another trend. And I'm not going all the way to, the on-demand printed products, but this is factories that can quickly shift what they are manufactured. So line shift becomes faster, as well as the ability to switch the products it makes. Then the most interesting area that we're seeing emerging now is around connecting with the suppliers. Folks have always connected very well with who they're selling to. Why? You got to be nice to the guy who's going to write you the check. And then they turn around and they go to the supplier and go, I'm writing the check and I'm going to behave in a different way. That behavior, we think this 18 months of fun is fundamentally changing. We see the emergence of joint business planning with your key suppliers. And one of the emerging themes that has come out of that, especially with IoT and connections, is that now I can know if my supplier is going to fail on delivering something that I need either as an input or a finished good before the supplier even tells me. So now you have something end to end that is going from understanding demand and supply, value at risk from the customer, how I manage my planning and how do I run it, what do I do with my DCs, what do I do with my factories, and then your JBPs with your suppliers. And now you have a model that is starting to unchain. I saw a lot of head nodding, so I'm sure you got some ideas and thoughts, Roland.
Yeah, I would add a couple of things to your thoughts. First of all, from a legacy perspective, I mean, demand signals have mostly, for the most part, in the past have been built off past experience or last year's data or 3 years in the past data. I mean, a lot of people out there might be saying, well, gosh, how do we get started in this journey? You know, some of the things that we did early on, and I've seen done in different retail businesses, is start just by adding things to your demand signal that would cause you to be smarter than you were a year ago. You can call it AI, you can call it algorithms, you can call it whatever you'd like, but you've got to start moving the needle towards smart intellectual capabilities in that space. Just adding things like weather, events, patterns of behavior in markets, those things are not hard things to go get to add to demand signals, but it makes a significant difference in the overall capabilities that you have. We've seen certain times of year where we've done this with just weather and events happening in the local area and have been able to increase sales by 20%. And then of course you have to do that planning on the front side and get capability back through the supply chain to run up a 20% increase in sales. And when I talk about automation, I want to be clear on that because I think most logistics supply chains today have a conveyor capability. This is not conveyors. This is intellectual bots that go get demand from a slot and bring it to a loading or unloading capability. So these are things that are being done inside of distribution centers that deliver efficiency and productivity a lot more efficiently than we could with conveyors and forklifts in the past. So I want to be clear that that word automation is a lot broader and deeper topic than just what superficially we've seen in the past. And then the last thing that I'll talk about just briefly is this concept of micro fulfillment centers, or you called them smaller distribution centers or whatever. You know, I do think that retail had to realize, physical retail, sorry, had to realize how big of a value that they really had with the real estate that was across the landscape. You know, we went through these paradigm shifts where we went, okay, everything's going from physical to digital. We need the digital assets and not the physical assets anymore. I would tell you nothing could be further from the truth. I think a lot of the store footprint that's out there today could be used in a micro fulfillment kind of capability, because the one thing that physical retail did a great job of over the years is putting the locations the closest to the customer. And we started on that journey a long time ago, just trying to rationalize in our head that the assets that we have today may have to be utilized differently in the future in order to continue to what? Keep the customer satisfied, whether it's with SKU and assortment, or whether it's speed of delivery and capability. But we had to think about delivering those capabilities differently and using the assets differently than what we had done in the past. So that's the unlock. And again, customers, we weren't trying to go too far away from what they were asking us to solve. And you have to be creative, you have to be innovative, you have to think three-dimensionally around the problem. But at the end of the day, it's really, don't overcomplicate it. It's what are they asking you to solve for them? And then how do you use those assets and components within your supply chain? Invest in the right areas, whether that be AI or automation. But how do you solve what they're really pinch points for the consumer? Let me pause.
No, I think that's a great segue into kind of looking ahead, right? What does deconstruct and reconstruct mean? And this follows the simple definition of insanity given to us by Einstein, which said, if you continue to, work or operate the same way you did before and expect different results, that's a tough one. That doesn't work. And Roland said in his own wonderful way, which is, you know, looking at past behavior will not guarantee future performance. Maybe that's a tagline every supply chain should add now, just like the financial services guys, you know, past performance is not a guarantee of anything in the future. So
yeah, I'll point on culture here at this moment, because I think it's important. You know, every company looks at the richness of their culture in order to be able to perform these activities that we've got on this slide. Do we have a differentiator in our culture that allows us to move forward? I would tell you that a lot of companies out there are guilty at looking at their culture in like a museum. Culture is reinvented with every new person that you hire. And they have an ability to add creatively, innovatively to that culture set. And then you have a set of values and beliefs that are more concrete, but that culture should be a living, breathing organism. And I think that's what allows you to innovate, create, and continue to stay up with the customer, and maybe even, you know, give them some an excitement about what you're doing, versus treating your culture as a museum, something you're always looking back to.
You know, that's a complete different thread you pulled, which was fascinating, right? So as we go from retailers to engineering companies to pharma companies to, you know, deep sea drilling, you get engineering cultures, you get cultures of quality, you get cultures of financial performance. But what you're pointing to is, in the light of what's happening in the market, and if you're going to deconstruct and reconstruct, then have culture as a core element that may have to be adjusted. Exactly. So what, you know, we talked about the fact that 88% of companies did not pass the resiliency test. And 12, if you could flip to the next one, 12% did. And so we looked at, you know, how did these companies think about it? And if I may start from the right, it was, of course, with the customer orientation. The second one was financial viability, because today money is cheap. You can say money is cheap for large companies and small companies. And, you know, here in the Valley, I think money has no cost, the way it's getting spent around here. But so that's available. How do you use your money? What are your go-to-market channels, right? What are the different ways you're going to communicate? Logistics systems, we've talked, manufacturing network. This is becoming a really fascinating one, because you are trying to get closer and closer to where product is being made, to where it's being sold. And that is not a knee-jerk reaction. Let me be transparent. I don't know how many times we get asked, hey, what if I wanted to get out of a particular country? Will I be able to make it? And I'll give you an example of white goods, you know, washers, dryers, refrigerators. There are areas within certain countries where within 300 miles, you can go from a steel mill, a motor, a panel, and everything built end to end, including the chips. You can launch a highly sophisticated drone with software, hardware, and everything else in 4 weeks or less. So if you're going to move the network, you're going to have to think about the ecosystem that comes with it, which includes the supplier. And finally, your planning and product portfolio. Product portfolio has always been something that has been given a little bit of lip service, but not enough depth, which says, how do you build this product? And especially now, when we know that products are talking, right? That have a hardware component and a software component. We've talked about it a few years ago, a friend of mine, Eric Gervais, and me, and we said, products are talking, are you listening? And what we found, and we consistently find, other than the leaders, for a supply chain to work well, they gotta listen. So these are kind of the dimensions and how you think about it. So maybe a question for you, Roland, would be, you know, is there one that you overemphasize, or is there one that you focus more on, you get started with, you know, because it's difficult to get started in multiple different areas and keep all the balls in the air at the same time.
Yeah, not to be repetitive, but yet to be repetitive. You know, the one that I think that starts your thought process around this is, what is the customer asking you to solve? I think resiliency is more or less being prepared what the customer may accelerate versus trying to change some kind of dynamic inside your own business. If the customer is asking you to solve for speed, if the customer is asking you to solve for assortment, if the customer is asking you to solve for price, if the customer's, whatever they're asking you to solve, that becomes your bench point of getting back through the supply chain and saying, how can we do that? If it's physical stores, if it's e-commerce, if it's digital, a hybrid model of both, starting with that component of what they're asking you to solve for them. And then looking at the competitive landscape as well. In today's environment, there's more data and information out there than ever before. So knowing what that competitive landscape looks like as you develop that customer-centric kind of strategy and focus, then allows you to be more solidified around where you start to re-engineer, if you will, your supply chain. It could be that the customer's asking you to solve for speed, that I order it today and it takes me 5 days to get it. Well, that's not good enough. I want it in 24 hours. I want it in 36 hours. So what do you have to do inside that supply chain, including the manufacturer, all the way through your logistics channel to make that readily available? And then maybe even ask yourself, well, what can I do to delight them even more? If they expect to be in 36 hours or 20, what can I do to delight them in 30 minutes? I mean, you just allow your mind to continue to accelerate their happiness. And when you do that, you think about the art of the possibility of the opportunities that you have in front of us. And so I think this chart is good, but at the end of the day, I would pin the tail around what the customer is asking you to solve and then double click on that and then start your rebuild strategy.
Love it. Love it. Hey, you went from, hey, let me make sure I have the products that you need in a location that you might like, to now, how do I delight you in 30 minutes or less? I think a bunch of folks on the call might just drop off and have a startup of their own and call Ravi. Maybe if we move on to as we move on, we said, hey, who are the stakeholders? What would you think about as you go through this around deconstructing, reconstructing? The one area that we haven't talked as much about is, we talked about customers, channels, partners, your products and offerings, is sustainability. And we know that that is a very important topic to consider. And, data and AI is a big component of this. It helps us, but also important is some radical thinking. So what was some of the interesting thinking that we've seen has started with packaging, for example, right? Packaging was built to stop people from either taking things they haven't paid for from stores, or ensuring that in transit they don't get destroyed, or as a marketing document or a marketing brochure for your company. So now you say, okay, that world has fundamentally evolved. How do we do it different? This is just a simple example. And we have seen quite a few delivery services now not send anything through a package. They just take the product, pick it up the shelf, and drop it. What a wonderful way to think about and reduce that. Now as we continue to extend that, stick with customer delight, and you work backwards through, then you might eliminate everything that is not needed. And, to quote Michelangelo, right, he said it was a piece of stone, but there was a David in there. And I knew. So taking away anything that is not needed is the name of the game if we are going to be true to the sustainability goals. Going from the Renaissance to now, Roland.
Yeah, I think sustainability, if I can be so bold, is to say that is one area where everybody has to dream bigger than they're capable of doing. The story.
Sorry to stop you right there. Can you repeat what you said? Sustainability is an area where everybody's got
The goal has to be bigger than what you're capable of doing. I can remember back when Lee Scott was our CEO at Walmart, and he walked in a small room, a group of us as executives, and said, you know what? I think we need to be 100% sustainable. We looked at him and said, you got to be kidding. We have thousands of trucks on the road every day. We have ships on the water every day. We deliver hundreds there's no way we can be 100% sustainable. But through that big goal that Lee set, we started to chip away at your Michelangelo stone, if you will, and started to really breathe through the innovation cycle, things that would help us be all the way 100% sustainable, even up to and including, sustainable trucks and cars on delivery now with the advent of electric cars and so forth. But it has to start with something bigger than who you are today, and that you're even capable of dreaming that big. And I truly believe, and Walmart is on the trajectory of being one of the more sustainable companies, just through whether it's energy or whether it's fuel, et cetera. I truly believe that without that big, hairy, audacious goal of having everybody wonder how in the world are we going to be able to do this, without something like that energizes the team, I think it's table stakes. And I think ultimately, and I'll close with this one, but I think ultimately the customer will not only expect it, but demand it. So if you're not working in that sustainability space and doing it in a way that causes you to think bigger than who you are today, I think you're going to fall way behind, regardless of the other great things that you might do within your supply chain. I think you're just going to lose ground, because I think it's going to be a ticket to play, is that you have to be able to say you're sustainable.
So that's a great thing, right? Customers not only going to expect it, but demand it. I'm going to close that out by saying, and they're ready to pay for it. And companies are not going to fund you if you don't. So, paying 5% extra on a bond because you're not ESG compliant will certainly start to pinch the bottom line. So I think that's a great way to think. So then, we've gone through this. I know, Roland, you and I could go for hours, but there's quite a few questions. So if we move to the last slide, right? So companies which are affected by disruptions and break, they're fragile. And I'm quoting Nassim Taleb for fans of Nassim Taleb out there. And I know there's a lot of them. The companies that can withstand disruptions and still survive, robust. But what we are talking about is truly resilient, that come back stronger, right? It is come back stronger in the face of resilience to be better. So that's what we're going to close out on. And now we're going to take quite a few of the questions we have here. And thank you for staying with us and asking these questions. So let's see. I am going in a complete random order, but wow, let's take this one. How are carbon footprinting requirements impacting the supply chain redesign? And the new generation of leaders, i.e. below 35, maybe that's a dig at you and me, Roland, are extremely sensitive to climate change and sustainability. How will the supply chain leaders react? That's a good one.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that sustainability is one of those things that I don't care if you're 35 or 105. I think at the end of the day, you are going to have to, it's going to be a ticket to play. If your supply chain cannot answer the call on how you're going to have a sustainable footprint, I just don't think you're going to be able to survive. And I think it has to start from the top. I think one of the things that really made us look at it as a company is it started from the CEO and went down through the organization. You can try and do it bottom up, but I think at the end of the day, it really has to be something that's mandated, and then you just create the innovation wheel to go out there and figure it out. I know, for example, there were a lot of things that were done just through the inquiry of our associates going, well, why do we do this? This is not sustainable. Why don't we do it this way? And through that questioning and through that give and take, because we don't have all the answers. No one person does, no group does. But you put 1 million people to work on a problem, I promise you, you'll come up with some great ideas that can help you be more sustainable. So I don't think it has anything to do with necessarily age or I just think you have to go do it. And you have to really make sure your goals are huge in this space. I really do.
And the way you answered the second part of the question, which was how will supply chain leaders react? Well, what we're saying is you don't have a choice, because if the customer demands it, and if the, again, finance challenges and the top-down leaders believe in it, and they've been speaking about it for some time now. Now they're going to have to do it. It becomes an imperative where you don't have a choice.
Exactly. Yeah, you really do have to. And it's not only, we had to get over this paradigm of we could do good business while doing good things. Sometimes we think they are in opposition, that you can't do sustainable acts and save money. But I'm telling you what, you can do both. It's an and proposition, not an either or.
Another interesting one is this thing around circular economy and breaking them into breaking the circular components into a linear economy. That's a fascinating question, because they are localized and they're circular there in supply chain when you redesign your supply chains. But you got to break them down into smaller linear components that can be built, is how I'm interpreting the question. And of course, in the area of logistics, it's a significant challenge. How do you rethink that? That's interesting. I don't know if you have any thoughts, Roland.
We had pretty sophisticated models that were developed internally, and we used some external tools as well that allowed us to think about our network from end to end. You could decide where you want a depot or a distribution center, but then leave out the transportation mileage and end up shooting yourself in the foot. And so you have to have the data. And this is where I think AI and some of the data centricity kinds of things really help you out. Is first of all, what are you trying to solve for? What's your customer asking or demanding from you? And then how do you model that in a way that allows you to think end to end on the problem set? Because a lot of people will think about one thing and leave out another. And that's really a supply chain. It really is an end-to-end kind of proposition. And it could end up being where, we ended up moving or skewing distribution points, maybe away from the centroid of where it should be, just based on where the base population was for those stores. So it is a dynamic model with inputs, with then really data around what the customer's asking to solve for. It could be that time horizon we talked about. It could be the SKU assortment we talked about. But what are they asking you to do? And then how do you model it to get those capabilities out there?
There's a couple of questions around politics and the policy between the US and China or anything else. If I might almost step away from that, because that's a red herring. We have a much bigger problem that is happening as a result of the pandemic, the shortages, the energy infrastructure being thoroughly challenged and changing, the sustainability, and then finally the customer, last but not the least, was asking for something else. Those are much bigger and more powerful changes in my mind than 2 or 5 leaders of the world trying to decide what the world's going to look like.
Well, at the end of the day, I'm a lot of things, but I'm not a politician, so I can't give you that perspective. But I would tell you that my sense of the supply unchained, if you will, is a worldwide system. I've run global sourcing offices across the world. We were in 28 countries across the world. And to me, it's a worldwide problem that we're trying to solve. And if your company can be a part of that worldwide solution in whatever small or big way, that would be absolutely fantastic. But I don't think you can leave countries out anymore. I don't think you can leave thought processes that aren't global in nature in some way, at least around sustainability as an example. You've got to put on your worldview regarding that. And I think personally, for the world at large to be as great as it can be, it's going to take the entire globe thinking along these lines. We can't do sustainability here if China's not a part of it. We can't do it if India's not a part of it. We can't do it if Mexico's not a part of it. We've got to have a worldwide thought process on some of these initiatives. And then inside your company, you've got to set that true north as being accretive towards those paths.
Well, so we started out with kind of saying, hey, problems originated because of a bunch of stuff. I sometimes call it the 5 nanometer problem, which is the size of a COVID virus. And that has led to a 5 nanometer problem in semiconductors and all the way through. So, but you elevated it to what it is, right? It is truly a global challenge, and unchaining the supply chain is almost took it to a moral imperative that if we don't fix it, then you know what, it's ourselves to blame. The tools exist, the approaches exist, the culture is there, the customers will play. So unless you're a couple of months away from retirement and you lead supply chains, maybe it's time to rethink and unchain your supply chain is what I would say. I know we are on time. We could go for, Roland and I could go for a long time, but we'll stop there. And thank you for Roland. Thank you, Ravi, for hosting us. And thank you for all the questions. The questions we haven't answered, we will endeavor to answer them. Ravi.
And I'll have you mute I really want to thank Suketu and Roland here for the first, I would hope, in a series of conversations. And there were just so many interesting questions also. There were some that we didn't get to, but this, how radically things have changed in the last few years. And, supply chain issues are not just front page of Wall Street Journal, they're front page of New York Times, and how we have different expectations and fulfillment requirements. And we want green fulfillment, as someone had suggested. So keep your eyes on the Hive meetup group. We'll do more of these events. I thank you, Suketu and Roland, for this excellent conversation. Maddie?
A pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much, Roland and Suketu. This was so interesting. And I did drop links for you guys, all the different things that you were talking about in your presentation, Suketu. And I will go ahead and also post that on the meetup page. So if you guys didn't get to see that in the chat, I will put that there. Just a reminder that the recording will be automatically sent out to you tomorrow. Thank you all for joining us today. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.